G'day, this is Real World News, a journalism program produced by the students at QUT. My name is Pat Heaney and our guest today is Professor Grant Hamilton, an Associate Professor of Ecology at QUT. Grant's current research involves harnessing cutting-edge technology in the form of drones, thermal imaging and AI to enable for more accurate monitoring of wildlife populations, particularly koalas. Good morning, Grant. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks, Pat.
Now, in my mind, Grant, nature and technology are seemingly distinct ideas, different fields of work. Can you first tell me how you combine these two ideas to start using drones to monitor animals?
First of all, people used their eyes to look for animals, of course. It's the most obvious thing to do. But then we started using telescopes. We started using binoculars. All of these stages helped us to monitor better. And what we're doing now is using leading edge technology to cover vastly more areas, to process the data more quickly, and ultimately to be more accurate.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell me what's so special about these drones? You mentioned, or I've heard about thermal imaging and the work of AI in that. Can you walk me through thermal imaging first, and then how an AI takes these thermal images and produces a number of animals at the other end?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the drones themselves are simply the workhorses. They fly. They carry whatever you put underneath them. So the value of having a drone is the perspective. You're in the air rather than on the ground. The thermal sensor it carries will detect heat energy from the animals that we're looking for. And the nice thing about that is that it can break through the canopy, and it's easier to detect than simply the spectrum that we usually see. The artificial intelligence, on the other hand, is quite complex, and you need to train that to look for particular things. And at the end of a lot of training, and a lot of training, and a lot of training, you end up with an accurate algorithm that can find, for example, koalas.
And how have you been training this AI?
Well, it's tedious.
Yep.
Essentially, what you do is look through the imagery. I say what you do, it's been a group of volunteers and PhD students that have been really, really good about getting into the thermal imagery. So they draw bounding boxes around the things that are koalas, and they have images of things that aren't koalas. And so what the thermal imagery, the algorithm might say, well, you know, there's a blob, is it a koala? And we would say, no, that's a car engine, or that's a kangaroo. So is that a koala? Yes. And so you go through and you train it with what is a koala and what isn't a koala.
Yeah, and how do these drones, you mentioned the progression from binoculars to drones and to further leading edge technology. How do these drones compare to traditional on the ground methods in terms of maybe cost, the area you can cover, and then obviously accuracy?
Yeah, so certainly it's the combination which leads to accuracy. The drones themselves seem to be quite expensive. The combination of the drone plus the sensor will cost you about the same as a car, say. But when you consider you need to pay people every single time to go out and survey a much smaller area, it becomes obvious after a while that having these kind of workhorses that can cover large areas, it rapidly becomes much more efficient. So there's an initial large cost, but that is defrayed over years as you continue to use them. It's the combination, as I say, of the covering a large area, using the thermal sensor, and then using algorithms, which ultimately leads to the high accuracy.
And what is that accuracy around at the moment?
We've registered this at around 86%, and that's up to 100% in some places. And of course, by itself, that doesn't mean much. It's really in comparison to, for example, expert human observers. And we know from studies that have been done before that humans will only detect about 7 out of 10 koalas that are out there. And so if you think about that, for every 10 koalas, you're missing 3 of them, whereas we're getting much closer to finding them all.
Now, Australia obviously has a high rate of natural disasters, particularly bushfires, and the frequency of these is expected to increase. How does this affect the scope and the direction of your work?
It's really, really important. The Black Summer bushfires pointed something fundamental out to us, that we really don't know what's in our backyard. And it's very hard to make estimates of, you know, what has been destroyed when you really just don't know what was there. So the important thing it pointed out to us was we need to understand where the animals are, the important places that they are, and there's more than this. It comes down to how do those animals interact across a landscape, because that's going to lead to resilience in the long term. So we need to understand the places to protect, where the animals are, and how to keep connection between those places.
And we've covered drones mostly koalas mostly thus far with the drones. Can you use them to find any other species, or have you been covering any other populations as well?
Yeah, certainly. So we use drones, and actually we use camera traps as well to look for deer. And deer are an invasive species, and they do cause quite a lot of damage. And so there's a lot of local government authorities and state governments that are concerned about deer. We're also about to embark on a program of looking for predators of koalas, and that includes things like wild dogs. And we're looking around the Noosa region to develop a program where we can have algorithms to find wild dogs and ping off an SMS, for example, to researchers here or people in government, to let them know that they're around.
And that data you collect of all the populations, do you use that yourself, or do you pass that on to other organisations? Who takes advantage of the data you collect with these drones?
Look, the real heroes here are the people on the ground, and they're folks like Landcare Australia groups. They're the people who will go out and rescue koalas, but more than that, in the long term, they're the ones who manage the land to make it a fertile ground, really, for koalas to live in. So it really is these land managers that are the important connection here. We can create knowledge, but by and large what we don't do is go and implement that on the ground. That's really why it's so important to have a strong connection between the university and these land management groups.
No worries, Grant. That's about all we've got time for today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we cut it off?
No, thanks, Pat.
No worries at all. That's all for QUT News today. My name is Pat Heaney. See you next time.